So this is the new TACX Alpine from Garmin, and this isn't just a gradient simulator. This actually does a lot more than just going up and down for hills and descents. This also allows for the forward and backward motion that can be had with their Neo 3M and Neo 2T motion plates, but it also allows for the side-to-side flex that comes on those trainers. And to top it all off, it even has steering capabilities with certain indoor apps. So this is more than just adding some realism to hills and descents. It's actually one of the more immersive and dynamic indoor riding experience that you can currently get. Now, something I was not expecting though with this was how much I would actually like it. So I tend to shy away from things that move this much when I'm riding inside because I feel like they can sometimes actually detract from my ride. But I have to say that I have been really enjoying my time in this, but being that it may be the best, it also comes at a price where the Alpine runs $10.99, and then you also need a compatible trainer, which is going to run you anywhere from $13.99 for the Neo 2T all the way up to $19.99 for the Neo 3M. Is that worth it? Well, let's chat about it. So the Alpine offers movement basically on every plane where it can replicate up to a 25% climb all the way down to a negative 10% descent. And then additionally, it can also accommodate for the forward and backward motion that's available on their Neo 3M trainer as well as their Neo 2T with their motion plates. And those trainers also have a little bit of side-to-side flex that's built into the frame of those trainers, giving a little bit of lateral motion, and the Alpine can also accommodate for that using its unique linkage that they have where you attach your bike. And then lastly, it also has steering capabilities with compatible indoor cycling apps like, let's say, Zwift. And for compatibility, the Alpine only works with their Neo 2T trainers as well as their Neo 3M trainers. But one important thing to note is that you actually need their axle upgrade kit for the Neo 2T to allow the axle to rotate. But the nice thing is they actually include that kit with the Alpine. And you don't need the Neo 2T motion plates to use this, by the way. You can totally use it without those if you don't want that forward and backward motion. But the forward and backward motion is kind of part of this whole experience, though. And the Alpine only works with TACX trainers and only those two trainers specifically, but this is going to be pretty similar to Wahoo as well as Elite's gradient simulators, where those gradient simulators only work with their trainers too. And then in terms of app compatibility, so this is going to be fully compatible with Zwift for both the automatic gradient changes as well as the steering aspects if you'd like. And then this is also going to be compatible with TACX's own training app for the automatic gradient changes, but TACX's app doesn't have the steering capabilities, at least in the moment. But I'd have to imagine that the app list as well as the compatibility will increase as time goes on. When it comes to setup, so it arrives in a pretty good sized box, which allows it to be nearly 100% assembled. It's also light enough where you can totally just lift it out of the box, so I don't think that necessarily should be an issue here. And for what you get inside the box, so there's going to be manuals, there's also going to be adapters for your fork, there's also adapters if you own a Neo 2T, there's a power cord, the base plate, and then the Alpine itself. For axle compatibility, so you can use the Alpine with standard quick releases as well as through axles, and they include a variety of adapters here depending on your particular bike. And I thought this little adapter carrier thing that they have here was kind of handy to keep all of them organized, not just like laying around loose. And like I was mentioning earlier, they actually include the axle adapter upgrade kit for those of you out there with the Neo 2T, which allows for the axle to rotate. So if you have the Neo 2T and don't have this yet, it is included with the Alpine. So the first thing that you want to do is align the base plate with your front wheel, where they have markings on the base plate for the ideal position, and you want to just make sure that it's aligned correctly with your bike for the best experience. Next up, go ahead and install the appropriate axle adapters into the Alpine for your bike, and those just kind of snap into place. Next, you'll want to roll the Alpine into place onto the base. And by the way, the Alpine moves forward and backward with 4 rubber feet on the bottom. And I also make sure to clean the feet off from any debris that may have been on my floor for the smoothest experience. And you'll see that if you got the alignment right on the base plate to your fork, the markings on the Alpine should then just align with the base plate. And then from there, you'll install your fork to the Alpine using the through axle from your bike. And then, of course, remember to put in a brake block if you happen to have disc brakes. Next, you'll plug it in and then head over to the TACX training app to perform the initial pairing and calibration. So you'll first get it paired up with your Neo trainer just by entering the pairing procedure on each of the units. And then next, you'll actually enter your wheelbase into the app for the proper calibration. And they do include a measuring tape inside the box so you can do this. It may then ask for a firmware update before you proceed, but after that, then it'll perform an initial calibration to make sure everything is lined up. But then there's some final steps that you may need to do just to make sure that you have enough clearance for your particular bike. But after that, it's basically time to ride. So there's 2 ways to use this. So there's automatic gradient control, where the app that you're using can just adjust the grade depending on the route that you're riding, but you also can adjust the grade manually from the Alpine itself. So with manual control, they have up and down buttons on the top of the tower itself, where you can either adjust them in increments or you can hold the button down for bigger changes. It's not necessarily the most convenient to have to reach over your handlebars to get to those buttons, but I also don't see having to change gradients so often that you're constantly reaching down. It definitely would have been nice to have like a remote control like they have on the Wahoo Kicker Climb, but you can control the gradients from the TACX training app. Additionally, if you don't necessarily want the full incline range that the Alpine has to offer, you can actually set limits on both ends for how high it can go as well as how low it can go. So with automatic gradient control, since you already have your Alpine paired with your Neo trainer, this should just happen automatically when you use a compatible app. So for instance with Zwift, all you have to do is pair your Neo trainer to Zwift for resistance control and power. Zwift then talks to the trainer, and then the trainer talks to the Alpine. You don't necessarily have to pair the Alpine directly to Zwift for automatic gradient control. And the same thing goes for the TACX training app if you want to ride in that app, where all you need to do to experience the automatic gradient changes is pair the trainer. You will, however, use the TACX training app for manual gradient control if you want to control it via the app, and you can also do stuff like perform software updates, but you don't necessarily need to have the Alpine paired to the TACX app when you're actually riding in the TACX app to have automatic gradient control. However, if you want steering though, and let's say something like Zwift, this is where you will pair the Alpine as a steering control in the app, but that is totally optional and you don't have to have that steering bit if you don't want it. Now for the steering controls, I found the movement to be pretty controlled for the most part and could both feather the steering for smaller veers all the way to turning my handlebars as much as they could go to go from like one side of the road to the other. It felt overall pretty natural to me. And at the moment, steering is only compatible with Zwift and that isn't available in the TACX app. Now when it comes to the actual ride experience with the automatic gradient control as well as all the movement here, so I think we could break this down to 3 different aspects: realism, stability, as well as comfort. Now for realism, at the end of the day, we still are riding inside, so there's really only so much we can do to make it feel like we're riding outside. But I have to say that this is probably one of the most natural feeling indoor setups that I've used. Gradient changes are smooth and they also transition well as you go up in climbs as well as descend. The up and down movement isn't jerky and the gradient changes aren't in like steps or anything like that. It's all smooth transitions for the most part. One thing I would say though is that I feel like the gradient changes feel even smoother and possibly even more responsive on the TACX training app versus Zwift. But I guess that just has to do with the fact that TACX creates both the app as well as Alpine, so they can create the best experience there. Now, when it comes to the changes in grade and whether or not that actually adds realism, I think it actually does for the most part, and I think especially so with steeper climbs and descents, where with steep climbs, I think it adds that realism aspect where you can actually get out of the saddle like you would do in real life. And then with descents, same deal there, where there's some descents like in TACX's training app where it did really make me feel like I was kind of shooting down a hill. But putting the super steeps aside, these subtle changes in gradient help keep things a little bit more dynamic and kind of reduces some of the boarding that you have while riding inside for hours. And another thing that adds to the realism other than the gradient changes is all the built-in motion that they have here. And quite frankly, I think they kind of nailed it, combining pretty much every plane possible. So there's the forward and backward movement if you're using it with a Neo 3M or a Neo 2T with motion plates. There's obviously the up and down movement, as well as the side to side movement with the slight flex that's actually built into the Neo trainers, where the Alpine can actually accommodate for that side to side flex with its little linkage at the front axle. But then there's also the steering aspects, and I'm not necessarily talking about the steering aspects in the game itself. I'm just more talking about the fact that your handlebars aren't locked in a static position and you can actually move them. So it just helps keep your bike feel a little bit more fluid. But I think that's really where this shines, is that they were able to link all those things together. The gradient changes, the fore and aft movement, the side to side movement, and then even the steering, just kind of into one dynamic experience. But what I also appreciated about it is that it's not obnoxious either, where I got sick of it. It's just enough to keep me engaged, but not so much movement where it got annoying. But the movement isn't necessarily just about realism, so it's also about comfort, where all that movement also reduces fatigue on your body, especially for those longer indoor sessions. And that's certainly the exact same thing I found with Wahoo's kicker move / climb combo, is that it just allowed me to ride for longer. And the same thing goes for the 3M and Alpine combo. So if you don't want that forward and backward movement, you don't have to have it. Now, here's what's kind of interesting though. So I feel like the Alpine actually changes the ride dynamics of the 3M a little bit. So let me explain. So with the Neo 3M on its own without the Alpine, I feel like the movement is almost a little bit jerky at times, where it feels like I'm kind of like rocking back and forth a little bit too easily. But when I have the Alpine installed, it sort of feels like the Alpine slows down the movement a little bit and almost dampens it a little bit, which makes it feel a little bit more natural. And funny enough, this is actually the exact same thing I found on the Wahoo Kicker Move, where when I installed the Kicker Climb with the little like foot thing that they have right there, it actually slowed down the movement as well, and I enjoyed it even more. So I don't necessarily know how to to pinpoint exactly what's going on there with both the Wahoo kicker move / climb combo, as well as the Neo 3M, as well as the Alpine, but it does seem like a better experience when you actually have both of them paired up together. Now, when it comes to stability though, so that can be an issue when we start adding this much movement. But again, being that the Alpine seems to actually slow down the movement of the 3M, or the motion plates for that matter, I was actually incredibly surprised at how stable it was, both for climbing out of the saddle as well as sprints. And the same thing goes for sprinting, where I'm not necessarily a fan of sprinting with the 3M alone without the Alpine, but I actually think it's not bad with the Alpine installed. You can go ahead and, of course, lock the 3M if you don't want that additional movement, but for like 99% of the riding that I've been doing, I've just left it unlocked, and it's felt great. I think the only thing with sprints that definitely still happens is the transitions from standing up quickly or sitting down too quickly, where the weight of your body may influence the trainer to move forwards or backwards. So there may be a little bit of an unwanted movement there, but other than that, I kind of like the experience. Now, compared to the Wahoo kicker climb / move combo, which offers a similar experience, they actually have different ride characteristics as well as some important features that are only found in one solution versus another. In terms of the actual movement, so the kicker move / climb combo offers a little bit more forward and backward movement than the Neo 3M / Alpine combo, but it also does offer a little bit of side-to-side movement. When it comes to replicating grades, so the Alpine can go up to 25% all the way down to -10%, and then with the kicker climb, that goes up to 20% and then down to -10%. Specs aside though, I think both of them provide a pretty comparable experience when it comes to the automatic grade adjustments, at least with something like Zwift, where both provide a good experience. I think it's really more about all the other movement that feels a little bit different. When it comes to the forward and backward motion, so both of them have an arc where there's a curve at both ends, which allows the trainer to kind of bring itself back to center. But the kicker move has a longer arc and a little bit more range, so the movement is a little bit less abrupt at the center than the Neo 3M. So there's a little bit more float with the kicker move, and with the Neo 3M, it comes back to center a little bit more quickly. Which one do I actually prefer? Well, if we're talking about standalone trainers without the gradient simulators with the 3M versus the kicker move, I tend to prefer the kicker move because there's a little bit more float. But like I was mentioning earlier, the Alpine does seem to change the dynamics of the 3M, and this is very much the same as the kicker move and climb combo, where it basically just kind of like softens the experience quite a bit. The kicker move definitely still has a little bit more float to it, but for the overall ride experience, I tend to lean towards this 3M Alpine combo, and that's really just because of this kind of like dynamic steering aspect, as well as the side-to-side movement, which all just feels kind of like natural and put together for me. Now, the kicker move does have one big advantage over the Neo 3M, where if you don't want that forward and backward movement, all you have to do is just like unclip your pedal and then flick this little lever to lock out the trainer. That isn't available on the Neo 3M, where if you do want to lock it out, you actually have to get off your bike and then turn these little knobs on the back of the trainer. But one thing I would say though is that since the ride dynamics do feel a little bit different to me when combining these two things together, I don't necessarily feel the need to actually lock out the 3M. Now, in terms of price, so you can get the kicker move / climb combo for around $2,100 right now. And then with this exact setup right here, that runs $1,000 more. However, you can get into a little bit cheaper solution with the Neo 2T. So is this setup worth that extra money? Well, I do think that it provides the best indoor cycling experience that I've tried so far, but it's not to say that the kicker move / climb combo is bad by any means either. That's actually a great experience, but I do think that this edges it out. Anyhow, I'll have another more detailed video comparing this setup to the kicker move / climb combo, so make sure to subscribe to get a notification when that video comes out. And if you found the information in this video to be useful, do me a favor and hit that like button down below. And in the meantime, happy riding, and we will see you in the next video.